With the Me Too movement comes a reminder. It's not only about harassment and predatory behavior, it's also about discrimination. For every euro a man makes here in Europe, a woman makes 84 cents. This chart shows the pay gap among OECD member countries between men and women. In the half century since women started entering the workforce en masse, that gap has narrowed, but not enough. Ahead of International Women's Day, France's Junior Minister for Gender Equality unveiling a new bill to force companies to disclose and redress the imbalance. They would have 3 years to comply or else face fines. Is it the right medicine? Should salaries be openly discussed and displayed in the name of transparency? What about quotas of women in the boardroom and in management? There is such a quota already in place here in France. We're going to be asking our panel if the French workplace is any more or less sexist than elsewhere. What's at the root of that pay discrepancy? And how is a changing workplace impacting gender parity goals? We've talked on this show about the impact of automation and the gig economy. Will this brave new world we're entering to be cruel or kind to working women? Today in the France24 Debate, we're looking at the gender pay gap. With us, Chiara Condi. She's president and founder of Led by Her. Just in a word, what is Led by Her?
Led by Her is a nonprofit organization that works on women's empowerment through advocating for women's rights and women's entrepreneurship.
All right. You formerly worked for a big international organization. We'll talk about that perhaps a little bit later on. We're also pleased to welcome back Dipti Chandler, who's the founder of IMA France. And you're in one of those sectors that's really male-dominated. I'm talking about tech.
Yes, exactly. So at EMA, we promote gender equality in IT fields. And as you said, tech is an industry where females are not paid as equally than men.
Now, just after the Weinstein affair happened back in December, you were sitting alongside Natasha Henry here. And we're going to perhaps later on talk about how much has changed or not changed since the last time we saw each other. Natasha Henry, journalist and the author of, how do we translate this again? Les mecs lourds, the heavy-handed guys. Leery, lecherous. Yes. The lecherous men or paternalistic. I don't know how to translate this.
In any case, it's all part of the French law now against sexual harassment.
All right. We'll talk a little bit more about it. From Washington, D.C., Vanessa Brown-Calder, policy analyst at the Cato Institute, who looks at women and the labor market. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
The France24 Debate on Facebook and on Twitter, the hashtag F24Debate. Equal pay has been on the books in France since 1972. In practice, though, a woman earns 9% less for doing exactly the same job as a man. Now, to hammer home the point, President Macron visiting a real estate firm this Thursday, one that tops the list of companies striving for gender pay equality. This, as his government unveiled a draft bill to force companies to publish pay discrepancy statistics.
To mark International Women's Day, Emmanuel Macron paid a visit to a French company awarded for its efforts on gender equality. Determined to close the 9% pay gap, the government says the law on equal pay for equal work will be more stringently enforced over the next 3 years. And after 2022, companies that don't comply will be fined.
We're going to make public the names of companies that don't respect the law, those with the biggest pay gap. We will stigmatize them, because stigmatizing changes behavior. No one wants to be the bottom of the class on this issue.
In Paris's financial district, employees appear to welcome the news.
It's a good thing. Men and women should be paid the same for doing the same job. Full stop.
It could work if they really enforce it and do what's necessary to stop this gap between men and women.
For some companies, though, the financial penalty goes too far.
We already have a lot of laws in place. We should focus on informing and enforcing these current laws in workplaces, rather than spying on companies.
Macron's government has also set aside 420 million euros this year to tackle sexual harassment. The Prime Minister announcing that there'll be 5,000 more places in shelters to help victims of violence and an alert system that will coordinate police with hospitals and magistrates. And starting next year, all schools in France will have a member of staff trained to deal with harassment and tackle inequality.
Deepti Chandler, your reaction to the bill that's been unveiled?
Well, I think it's great. I think we should do that because it's been so many years that women are paid not equally than men. So if we expose these companies which are not trying to pay as equally than men, then maybe they'll react, and that will bring change in the society.
There's talk of, in the legislation, putting in a measure where if you don't have at least the statistics up, that there'll be fines, and they want a system where you can see where the government can have access to the gender pay statistics of a company.
Well, for my tech industry in which I work, I know that many companies are underpaying women, and even if women try to discuss with them and say, well, I'm having the same degree than the other man you've hired on the same role, on the same position, so why are you paying me under? And they don't have any reply to give it. It's just because you are a woman. And
why do you think it is?
Well, it's because the society think that men can have a situation which can help him to be paid better because he's a man, just because it's a gender question, actually, and they don't look at the qualities of the people, actually.
Chiara Conti, the idea that the government might be able to tap into human resources statistics to see if companies are doing something about that gender pay gap, is that a good thing?
Well, I think that in an ideal world, we wouldn't need these measures, but unfortunately in the real world we do. Because unless we have measures that expose what the truth is, and unless we have, it's the same thing for quotas, unless we put numbers and we create concrete objectives, we're never going to get to equality. And I think that's what the past has shown us, is that when we say equal opportunity, it does not mean equal access. And so harder measures have to be put in place so that we achieve those results, because otherwise equality will never happen unless we create it.
Nearly 40% of companies in France still don't have a wage plan to correct the imbalance. The Minister for Gender Equality, Marlène Schiappa, sat down with France24's Annette Young, and she says she's given companies until 2022 to put their plan into action.
Not something that we're used to doing in France, and so the first time that I did a naming and shaming operation, I found that the companies were quite shocked. They protested because in France, this is not something that we easily accept. There are other countries where this does happen, and it works quite well. And I think that it is a way of mobilizing public opinion. It is a way of telling companies that they have to look to public opinion, that public opinion is on our side, and that their image will be tarnished if they don't act in favor of women's equality.
Natasha Henry, the government taking the lead by, going in and asking human resources to open their books?
Sure, if something needs to be done, something needs to be done. If you need to send a message to the women telling them that from now on they will get the same pay and this is the principle we have set and everybody has to do it now, then I think it's a great message. Will the government go and look into the books of every single company in France? I don't know, but the symbol is very strong. It shows a very strong action towards equality, as you said. Absolutely. It's just like when we had all the debates about gender in politics. I mean, do we put quotas and stuff? Now you have a fine if your political party doesn't have the same amount of women as men on the list. And some of them don't do it, but we all know that they should. And the idea that they should is already a big step forward.
Vanessa Brown-Calder, you agree?
So I think that this conversation so far has been a little bit off. And what I mean by that is, so I'm not somebody who has a special expertise in the French gender pay gap. So I guess I can't speak too closely to that. But I do study the gender pay gap here in the United States. And I assume that some of the same things are true about those two gender pay gaps, because they're around the same. The pay gap over here is about 79 cents on the dollar. But what that gap is looking at is actually median domestic wages for men and for women. And it's really looking at the middle person in a normal distribution of income earners. And that person in the middle is going to be different for men than it is for women. The attributes of that person are different, at least they are here. So in other words, you have to control for things that matter in order to make this comparison and chalk it up to discrimination. And it may be true that there is some discrimination in the workplace in France. I don't know, maybe there's a lot. There may be some discrimination here in the United States, but that gender pay gap statistic just way overstates what that really looks like. And once you control for things that matter, like the number of hours worked, the jobs, the job location, the experience, the length of experience that a woman has versus a man on average has, then that pay gap starts to disappear. So I think that that's a really important part of the conversation that has not come up yet.
Well, it has come up. Just on that point, it has come up. In France, it's a 9% gap between what a man and a woman earns for exactly the same job.
So that is stunning to me if that's true. That's certainly not true here. The way that the gender pay gap is defined here is it's either the median or the average man and woman's wages, and those things are compared and subtracted, and then you have a 79 cents on the dollar is what we have here, that women are getting paid as compared to men. But you have to note that that is the median or the average woman compared to the
just
median
let me ask
or
you,
average
Vanessa,
man.
on the issue of redressing the imbalance, what do you think of the French government's stance that companies have to put forward some kind of a plan or else they'll face a fine?
You know, I mean, it looks like the plan is something along the lines of transparency. I mean, I guess that's great as long as people understand that you can't just take the average of women's wages at a company and compare them to the average of the group of men's wages at that company. And that's not a fair comparison. And so as much as that transparency bill or law that's coming that people are looking at there in France seeks to do that, that would be the wrong approach. Now, if you're going to take a fair comparison and you're going to compare men and women workers that do exactly the same job, that have exactly the same number of years of experience, that work the same number of hours per week, and you're going to compare those two and say that there's a difference there and they should be paid the same, sure. I mean, I guess that's great. I don't really have a strong feeling one way or another, but I want to make sure that the statistics are interpreted carefully here.
Chiara Condi?
Well, everything that I've seen shows that that you cannot account for the pay gap with anything but discrimination because it's too large. And actually, there are a lot of articles. I work, for example, in the field of entrepreneurship, and there are a lot of articles that show that women are considered a certain way and asked certain questions, and therefore they get treated a certain way only because they're women. And there's nothing but discrimination that actually is at the origin of that. So I think that we can't say that there is no pay gap. I think that there is an argument for saying we also have to build the pipeline. We have to build the talent of pool of women today because we have to get women in fields like tech and in other fields and start getting them and then building them along so that we can also proactively work against reducing the gender pay gap in a natural way. But I think that today everything has shown that there is no way to get to equality if we don't implement hard measures.
Hard measures, of course, one of the big disadvantages for women is they have children. And very often it's them who take time off. There's more and more paternity leaves here in France, but it is overwhelmingly women who take more care of kids than men. And as a result, well, you're spending less time on the corporate ladder.
And you spending less time in the kitchen. The parity at home is also a big problem here. It's a big issue. I mean, of course, if women have to do everything regarding household and all the shopping and cleaning and children, looking after the children, taking the children to the doctors and everything. And then the man is spending more time at work. So the imbalance starts there. We have to get the men to be more involved with whatever concerns the home, really. Because, of course, I mean, there are statistics that say if a man has one child, he comes back early from work. If he has two, if he has three, he comes back at 10 in the evening because he can't be bothered with all the mess at home. So there are figures saying that. Of course, if he's at work and she's at home. So there is a problem.
All right, when we come back, we're going to look at how women are changing the workplace going forward, especially with what they call the gig economy. Stay with us. You're watching the France 24 Debate. Welcome back, or welcome if you're just joining us. It's the France 24 Debate on International Women's Day. The French government has been touting measures to force companies to come up with a plan to narrow the gender pay gap or else face fines. We've been talking about it with Dipti Chandler, president of IMA France, which is an association that brings together
which promote gender equality in IT, actually.
In the tech sector.
Yes, in tech sector.
Also with us, Chiara Condi, president and founder of Led by Her, which helps women who want to become entrepreneurs and want to fight against discrimination in the workplace. As well with us, author and journalist Natacha Henry, whose 2011 book in French talks about lewd men. That's the word we're looking for. Lewd men who feel it's their God-given right to
especially in the workplace.
And especially in the workplace, make inappropriate remarks. Vanessa Brown-Calder, policy analyst at the Cato Institute think tank, is also with us from Washington. Welcome back. By the way, left-leaning French tabloid Libération had a special offer this Thursday. Cost of the newspaper, €2 if you're a woman, $2.50 if you're a man. This to highlight that pay discrepancy. An interesting pitch. You're shaking your head, Natasha. Why is that?
Well, I'm really happy because the money is going to Laboratoire de l'Égalité, so it's a feminist group. At least the money is going to a safe place. I'm really happy about that. Now, I'm not sure we should separate men and women like this. I'm not sure if I was a man, I'd probably think this is discrimination. I mean, do we know if you are getting a better salary than a female colleague here, for instance, or anywhere else? I think it's a bit brutal. But I'm happy because the money is going to the right people.
Let me ask you what's going on across the Pyrenees in Spain. A general strike this Thursday. Would that be possible for the French trade unions to organize a general strike for these issues of pay equality and against domestic violence?
Well, the part of the French feminist movement has launched a strike today. A women's strike was launched today, but it's not easy to follow it and to go on strike suddenly because you're a woman. The country is not ready. In Spain, they've made lots of progress earlier on, especially regarding domestic violence.
Why is Spain ready and not France?
Because they started before us to, be heard. That the government, at least 10 years ago, was already passing laws against domestic violence. They took things very seriously sooner than here. So they tried here, but I mean, unless it's a very big collective movement, there's nothing you can do. I had to work today because I was managing group of women who had that space because it's the 8th of March. The company said that they would have a few hours to express concerns about sexual harassment. If it wasn't the 8th of March, we wouldn't have done it. So they were not on strike, and I wasn't on strike because we couldn't afford to.
Chiara Condi, the rest of the world has watched France since the Me Too movement and the intellectual arguments that have raged. There was, this petition about the right to be pestered that was signed most notably by the actress Catherine Deneuve. Listening to Natacha Henry and comparing what's going on today in France and Spain, what do you think of the country where you live right now?
Well, I think France is a great country to be in today. I love the fact that Macron made equality the cause of his quinquennat. I think that shows how important it is. I think that what we saw against the Me Too movement represented a minority, and I want to say another generation, because I don't think that's how my generation fights for gender equality. I think we're much more vocal about what is happening to us. And I think that we have freed the word for women. And I think that's the first step, because once you free the word and you say there is a problem here, that's when you can start finding solutions.
Dipti Chandler, that's been brought up a lot in discussion, a generation gap. Do you sense that?
Well, being in tech, yes, a lot. I think there is, as Kara said, there is a huge gap, and women are now talking about the problem, they're expressing themselves, and it's a huge progress, I must say. And of course, Macron wants to make gender equality a big part of his election. So I think it's a great opportunity for women, and we should take it to move faster in what we was not able to do.
How far should he take it? Because some are asking, should there even be a system where, and I know that there are certain startup companies that have done this, where they make public how much everybody earns inside the company. Mm-hmm. How far should he take it?
Well, I think exposing companies in different way between the pay gap or the gender discrimination will maybe help to decrease this problem.
Should the salaries of individual employees be made public?
I don't know. It's quite tough to answer, because it's a personal thing, but it depends. It depends on person who want to.
It depends on the person, depends on the company.
Yeah, I think it depends on the company, it depends on the person, but and it's going to be really interesting also how this measure is going to be implemented, and what Natasha said, how actually they're going to check on what companies are doing, because I think that's another issue. But I think that exposing is the first step to getting real solutions. And I want to say, what other options do we have? What has worked in the past? Nothing. And we're still stuck in the same fields with sometimes even larger pay gaps than were present before. So I think we need these measures.
All right, one of the measures that's been taken, France, following the example of Norway, it's not the only country that's done it. Since 2006 in Norway, they've enforced a 40% female quota in the boardroom of companies. Now, in that time, the wage gap has narrowed, but according to statistics, it's only narrowed up to a point. And there you see, it sort of seems to have plateaued, Chiara Condi, when you look at these are the statistics from Norway itself when it comes to the wage gap. Quotas of women in the boardroom, what has it changed?
Well, I think from studying gender discrimination in companies, in entrepreneurship, what happens is that why the boardroom is so important is because it's symbolic. So when you don't have women in the boardroom, then it's very difficult for women to climb up an organization. So basically, having quotas ensures that you have a female presence in the boardroom, and that has repercussions along for the entire company. And I think that's why it's very important. Obviously, it's not everything. And I think the problem is that a lot of companies are seeing that women are not going up in the middle levels. And that's another problem, which is building the talent of a female pipeline to go up in positions. And that's why other companies are trying other measures like sponsoring women and mentoring programs and other things internally, which ensure that there is more equality.
Vanessa Brown-Calder, you agree? So women getting hired in companies, but the glass ceiling starting in middle management.
Yeah, so I hate to be the wet blanket on this, but I disagree with the last panelist as far as its effective the effectivity of the gender quotas in Norway. They were instituted, and what the academic research says, so we've had, 15 years to study them now, is that actually the number of women which are inhabiting management roles in Norway has not increased. Obviously, the number of women on boards has increased. The experience level on those boards has decreased because the number of women that are really qualified based on their past experience to be on those boards is not high enough to support the gender quotas. And that's unfortunate. And the reason why I think that's particularly unfortunate for women is that now we have women on these boards who are not really, they don't have the experience to be there, they don't have the background to be there. And so I think it kind of gives women in high-level executive positions a bad name. And I hear the other callers are kind of laughing and chuckling at that. I really recommend that they take a look at the academic evidence on this, because there is a variety of Swedish academic evidence on this that's available. They can check out the Nordic gender ceiling.
But let me ask you, Vanessa, do you take Chiara's point that there is that glass ceiling and it starts at the middle management level?
It certainly does, and gender quotas have not changed that at all. So as far as it being symbolic and useful to have women in positions on boards, that doesn't seem to be the case because there hasn't been any trickle down from them being on boards.
So how do you do it? How do you break that glass ceiling then?
In middle management. Well, I think that one of the things that's been a problem in the Nordic countries is that they have a variety of social welfare policies which actually inhibit women from reaching their full potential. That's not the case in the United States, and actually we have more women in management roles here than in the Nordic countries. So I think that that's something to look at. And the reason for that, there's a variety of reasons for that, and it would take too long to explain during this quick debate. But one of the things is that the strong incentives that Norway and the other Nordic countries provide for women to be out of the workforce for long periods of time is really detrimental to their long-term career trajectories. And so that actually reduces the number of women which can then go on to high-level management positions and be qualified for those board positions and for other management positions in middle management.
Yeah, we were talking just before the break about maternity leave being one of the issues. Women have statistically more pauses in their careers and therefore earn less money when it comes time for retirement and getting their pension.
Well, I think that I think that maternity leave is something really, really important. And I think that social policies in this regard are part of women's rights, and they should be assured by countries. And I think that that's something really important when I look at entrepreneurship, for example, because most women are having kids at the same time that they're becoming entrepreneurs. This is what the statistics are showing us in the United States, for example. And there's research that shows that if a woman has a kid and a man has a kid and they are both in science and STEM fields, the chances of the woman becoming an entrepreneur reduce a lot. And for a man, it makes absolutely zero difference. So I think that policies need to be in place so that women can actually access
Is that doable? Is it possible?
I think it is. I think that the problem is that today we are trying to solve single problems rather than solving the whole problem, and we don't look at the problem holistically. And so we are just looking at something like fundraising, or we're just looking at pocket initiatives or getting women STEM here and there. But I think we have to do something that is mainstreaming, and that's going to be a huge investment for countries because there's 50% of our population whose potential we're not using today, and economies will need that potential to grow.
We'll need that potential to grow. There's also a higher number of women who work part-time than there are men, Natasha Henry.
Can I just go back to the boardroom thing? I think that it's very important to have more women in those boardrooms. I think it's a great initiative and wonderful if there are quotas. And not to say on the financial question, but regarding sexual harassment, I can assure you that the more women there are all around, at the top, I don't like these top and middle, but whatever, okay. So the more women everywhere in the company, the less sexual harassment there is. I know because I go to companies where there are many, many men and like 10% of women sometimes, and they are desperate for more women to join because when they are on their own and there's a group of men, then it's group sexual harassment.
I think it's 30%, the statistic. Yeah. It's when there are 30% women, that's when the culture changes.
Yeah.
Deputy Chandler?
Yeah, I want to add what Chiara said about women who's being graduated from STEM degrees used to, when they have kids, used to quit their job and stay at home because they have to take care of their family. I do agree with that. And it's sad because we having only 6.4% of women around the world being graduated from STEM degrees, 6.4. Can you imagine? It's even not half of the population. And Chiara was saying about 50% of the population we're not using the potential of the 50% of the population. Yes, we are not. And 6.4, it's just catastrophic.
Now, you work in the tech sector, Dipti, and you're well placed to know that the future may not be bright either, because the men and women facing the automation of the labor force. It means the jobs are going to change.
Yes.
Some are going to disappear. Mm-hmm. And this advent of a different kind of way of working, is it going to be good or bad for women?
Well, we should know that 85% of the jobs are not existing today. It's the technology which are going to shape them, and technology are going to create them. And today,
so these are jobs we don't yet know about.
Yes, exactly. And today, most of these jobs will be related to AI, artificial intelligence. And artificial intelligence today are being created by men. And these artificial intelligence are going to be used in the 5 years, in the coming 5 years. And if they are not creating by women, then in the 5-10 coming years, there won't be any woman being in AI and technology field. So it's really, really hard for me to accept that I'm going to be...
So how do you do it? How do you keep women from being shut out of the field of AI development?
Well, Chiara was telling about doing training. It is important to train women and to tell them that you can also do technology. It's not because you are a woman, you're not having a less brains. I mean, you are able to do wherever you want to. And if you can, you can get pregnant and have a boy. If you can build this boy, then you can do anything.
Vanessa Brown-Calder, your thoughts on will the workplace of the future, will the job market of the future be kind or cruel to women?
Oh, I think it will be kind. I mean, at least in the United States here, women are doing better than they ever have and really outpacing men on a variety of metrics, both in the workplace and in education. And so I think that women's stock is only going to continue to rise here. Going back to a couple of comments that some of the other callers mentioned, I don't want anyone to get the impression, I do think that there are a variety of social pressures and cultural pressures on women which are different from those on men, and that does make it hard for women to succeed in the workplace because there are pressures at home even which make it difficult for them to allocate their time between household domestic activities, which have to be done by someone, and all of the things that need to be done at work. And that only increases those pressures after children arrive on the scene. And I think that that's something really that must be litigated, which isn't quite the right term, within households between men and women. And women need to demand to have more support from their husbands as they go about trying to pursue their career objectives.
We were looking about this issue of how women can be supported if they decide to pursue whatever career it is. Of course, we're talking in the case of where the economy is going. It's not just in these white-collar, high-tech jobs. It's also other kinds of services jobs that are less skilled. A 1-gig economy job that's seemingly gender neutral is driving an Uber, since it's all automated, how whichever car gets picked. But even there, Stanford University did a survey and found women earned 7% less. In that survey, they found that 77% of women quit the platform after 6 months compared to 65% for men. Men drive 2.2% faster than women, which meant they got more rides. And they drive in locations where there's a higher surge pricing and lower wait times. So even though the system itself is blind to gender, women wound up earning less. What's your reaction to that, Natasha?
Well, people have said this here before. There's a lot of social pressure and things that we have been brought up with. And in the end, we are not as well treated as we should or as men, and equality is not there yet.
And one of the issues with this study was danger. Women weren't going to drive their Ubers in dangerous neighborhoods as much as men were.
So why do men do it? I don't know. I think the women are right.
Your thoughts on that? Do you agree that the future is looking bright for women in the workplace?
I think it's looking very bright, and I see everything that is being done to proactively support women as part of this bright future. I do worry about things like artificial intelligence, which are being created by men. When I was at the Web Summit, there was a robot, Sophia, and she was in a discussion with another robot whose name was Einstein, of course. And what did Einstein call Sophia? Babe. And I'm asking myself, where did he learn that?
Yeah.
Yes. So who is programming the artificial intelligence? And so that's a major question that we have to ask ourselves so that we can live in a more balanced world tomorrow.
All right.
But I also think it's a really big question of culture. And I think that culture plays a huge role in what we're seeing as blocking women. Because all the advances, we have to think that all the advances that we've seen for women have been only in 1 century. And we've had thousands and thousands of years of discrimination behind us. When people ask me, when are you going to start helping men led by her? And I say, well, when women are 50% of the entrepreneurs. We have to really, really integrate this fact that all the advances we've seen have been a very, very short lapse of time. It's only really recently that women entered the workforce, and we've been in a culture of discrimination, a culture that has been promoting men. And so we need to create the measures that break that culture and that put women in a new culture that we're going to create together.
Chiara Condi, I want to thank you very much. I want to thank Dipti Chandler, Natasha Henry. I want to thank as well Vanessa Brown-Calder for joining us from Washington, D.C. Stay with us. Media Watch is next. And we say hello to Charlene James.
Hello, and happy International Women's Day to everybody. So I brought a few stories from across the internet that I thought our viewers would be interested to see. Starting off with this one, AFP sent photographers all around the world to document women who are breaking barriers down in what are traditionally male-dominated fields. So some really interesting photos here, including a couple I want to highlight. This firefighter in Spain and a rickshaw driver in India. So really interesting how AFP used their fleet of photographers from around the world to really highlight this. Next up, the BBC put together a list of the most iconic images of protests featuring women. So from across the decades, so they start off with this one from Sweden of a woman attacking a neo-Nazi demonstrator with her purse. And then to more modern times, this one from 2016 in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, at a Black Lives Matter protest that really sent ripples all over the world with that photo that just encompasses so much emotion. And then finally, I want to highlight from the New York Times, an interesting project that they started today. It's called Overlooked. They're going back and finding women, remarkable women, that they did not write obituaries for back when they died. And they're going back and highlighting.
Because the New York Times is kind of the newspaper of record.
Exactly, exactly. So it's as known women as Sylvia Plath. They did not write an obituary for her, but also some interesting international figures as well. Madhubala, who is a Bollywood legend. Her life is compared to that of Marilyn Monroe. And Q Jin, who is a feminist revolutionary who is a sort of Joan of Arc figure in China. And it's interesting, in their introduction, they noted that even in the past 2 years, only 1 in 5 of their obituaries that they've written have been of women. So they're putting that kind of discrepancy front and center in this project.
All right, you heard our panelists there describing how we should be getting women to program the robots of tomorrow. We should also be getting more women as opposed to write the stories of today.
Yeah, that's right. And there's been a number of studies that have come out showing the discrepancy between men and women in media as well. This one in France that is from the it's from the Audiovisual Superior Council that shows that across television and radio, there's a 40-60 split between men and women represented on television and radio. And if we switch over to the U.S., we can see that across from print, internet, TV, it's male-dominated. It's most pronounced in the evening news broadcasts, where only 1 in 4 of the people bringing people the news every night are women on screen. And it's not just the people reporting it. It's also interesting to look at the topics that women disproportionately cover as well. So some things like sports, you can imagine that there's more men involved. But the number 2 category there is weather, which has nothing to do with gender. And it's interesting to see that nearly 3 in 4 of the reporters covering that beat are men. And I want to show, of course, since we're here at France24, the split down for France24 as well. So this was sent out actually to the entire team at France24. Women are actually overrepresented as anchors and presenters on screen at 70%, but it's experts, if you look at, only 25% are women. So that's definitely a place where we here at France24 have room to grow as well.
And Natasha Henry will no doubt nod when I say that we oftentimes have women who are specialists in the field and who can't make it because they have more obligations at home than and that is a real shame for us. So hopefully we can get more of them to come here to the studio. I want to thank you, Sean James. I want to thank our panel once again. Thank you for joining us here in the France24 debate.